Here we go.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Herbal Knowledge Keepers. And today we have our special guest with us, Jan Wyllie, and of course, Dakota Granny Woman, and myself, Blue Star Deer Woman. And as you have seen advertised in our Facebook group and all over our social network, the topic today is health and mortality issues related to the 2017 hurricanes. And I'd just like to share a little bit about Jan and Dakota. And each of these folks met online. And Jan invited Dakota to join the Open Intelligence, which is a knowledge management company. And the theme that we are addressing with these two databases is how the environment impacts humanity. Now, Jan's expertise is in separating fake news from real news. We don't hear that enough in our coverage, but that's one of his expertise. And the Herbal Database, what we're going to do is bridge between these two databases. And Jan will be showing real data about environmental problems, and the Herbal Database is showing evidence-based solutions to the health effects of those problems. And so we invite you, as we begin this conversation, to ask any questions that you may in the chat room or under, I believe we have a little icon below. You can ask questions and we'll answer them to the best of our knowledge. So welcome, Dakota. Welcome, Jan. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello.
Hi. So we have a lot to cover, and we're going to do our best to dig deep and see how much we can get done in about an hour. Jan, your work in endlessly and tirelessly compiling the beautiful facts into your environmental database, which I understand will be available to the public in maybe early 2018, something like that. And so for now, we're going to be showing you a beta version. It's still in progress, but you're going to get a taste of it, and I think you'll share my excitement at what's going to be available to all of us. Jan and I worked together with a team to create what we thought of and still think of as the People's Intelligence Agency, the same quality of information that is given to governments and corporations for a lot of money is going to be available to you. So, Jan, why don't you share with us now what you've discovered about the effects of these 2017 hurricanes?
Well, I suppose the first thing is that this is the reason that we need an inquiry rather than just a report. And most people are doing reports. The reason we need an inquiry is this is not an event that is stopping. It is ongoing. It is just starting. And the way I've organized the data, and I'd like to go through it in a fairly systematic way, is there's deaths, yes, and we're not going to deal with deaths today, but we've got toxins, chemicals and toxins infection, toxins pollution, and then we also have bacteria and viruses, and then the third thing, which is up and coming, especially in and then there's the mental health aspects. Now that's a big one, a bigger and going to be bigger. I mean, if you can imagine that, we have especially in Puerto Rico, where they still don't have electricity. Mental health is a real issue, partly because on the one hand you've got very poor people being affected, but they're still dependent on electricity and the general things that Western civilization has given us, and suddenly haven't taken it away. Not only do you have to face the disease, the toxins from the Superfund sites, but you also have, we're talking about depression and loads of it. But perhaps we can, start with the toxin problem. Is that good?
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
What we need to know about the database is that what this compilation was derived from was the full database is now 33,000 articles, and it's organized in such a way to make collections of very, very focused groups of articles like this one possible. I guess that's all we need to know.
Okay.
And it will be, as I say, available, and we hope that it will be easy enough to use for anybody to get the kinds of searches, the kinds of information sets that are not currently available with Google. But diving right into this, awful muck of toxins that, people have had to, put up with. And we'll start with, the first one, which is Texas and Houston. And we've got in Texas Superfund sites and around Houston Superfund sites. And the greatest curse that people are facing, according to Atlantic, is chemical pollutants. And there are Superfund sites, EPA studies of individual pollutants in soil and water understated the potential health effect cocktails of multiple chemicals at once. Now, this is an interesting thing. I'm trying to do things that people don't quite know, is that when you've got a lot of different chemicals mixed up together in water and in air, then you've got a combination effect. I'm sure that Dakota would, have a lot to say about this, is that it's not just one thing. You're being affected by a lot of things. And that, one of the problems that, especially Houston faced, quite different, all of the, the different areas, is that I didn't know this, but Houston is as big as Chicago, Cleveland, Detroit, and Philadelphia put together. And it's all concreted over. And the normal kind of drainage plains that used to be there are no longer there. And so, not when we're talking about Houston, one of the sources here says, and this is New York Times, the worst flood has not yet occurred. Houston was lucky because, there could be a storm surge coming up the Gulf of Mexico into Galveston Bay, up the ship canals, and overwhelm the refineries. Now, that didn't happen this time. And what I'm talking about is that this isn't the first time and it's not the last time. And one of the things that, if we were going to look at the database, I would be showing you is, how rising sea temperatures are going to produce the conditions for more hurricanes every year. And so, we're looking at what's going to happen next year. And it's going to get a lot worse. And that's clearly demonstrable in the data. So we've got, Superfund right now. We've got Superfund sites leaking, quote, elevated levels of digoxin. A sample showed digoxin above 70,000 ng. What is that? Ng per kilogram. The recommended dose is 30. So that's a big multiple.
So let's pause there for one moment. Dakota, what do you know about this dioxin?
Dioxin.
Is that dioxin? Dioxin is one of the most carcinogenic chemicals that we have, and it's so dangerous that it's been outlawed in some areas. And so dioxin is basically, you're looking at potential cancer arising from that. And
you know what?
Go ahead.
I was just going to say about dioxin, I mean, that was, we're talking about dioxins and PCBs and the kinds of stuff that Monsanto had to get put in Superfund sites because, they were too liable. There was this huge thing in the 70s that I'm sure you would know more about than I, where the government said, okay, we're going to leave these sites. Yes, when we've got the money, we're going to clean them up. And some money is being spent, but less and less money is being spent. And so we're still here, we're still in Houston, and here's another way of describing what the people in Houston are facing. Quote, a deadly gumbo of chemicals and carcinogens. Plants and refineries took a big hit, but not the biggest. It could be a lot worse. And then we have a problem with, okay, this is another very, very important aspect of this whole thing, which is coming out, but you probably won't hear about very much because of its nature. Scott Pruitt has withheld information about what are called risk management plans. And he's withheld that because he says that if he releases them, they could be of use to terrorists. And that is a way we can begin to see that argument coming out again and again, because although here in the beginning, there is a lot of attention about the various chemicals coming out of these plants, it won't be going on. And they won't be telling us, or you. And so, okay, we've got the normal sort of chemicals coming out of plants, but then to add insult to injury, the U.S. Air Force has sprayed 6 million acres of Texas with naled, which is a neurotoxin. And that is to control insects and mosquitoes. We've got, it's 75% of insects are gone, but it's not the case with mosquitoes. So they've been spraying this stuff all around.
So here again, neurotoxin. You know how they are affecting us?
These Dakota?
Oh, okay, you kind of cut out. Well, this particular one, I'd have to look at the Herbal Database to get all the facts on it, but one of the problems with pesticides in general is that they are a cause of degeneration of the nervous system. And so this is probably just more of the same. There was a big stink about it. People were making quite a protest about this spraying, but it continued even after people who knew about it were just up in arms saying, stop this.
Often, it is a hormone disruptor, and so that means that, it is associated with, and it breaks the placenta barrier, and it goes into the bloodstream, and so you're talking about very bad effects on reproduction and fertility. And so the Air Force was spraying, and the funny thing, it's not funny at all, but this stuff, natol, I'll just read this little bit. Especially troubling, given that the manufacturer of naled is Sue Benito Chemical Corporation, is also the manufacturer of the mosquito larvicide Sumilarv, a chemical now believed to have been the real culprit in the spike in birth defects in Brazil, originally attributed to the Zika virus. Funny thing, there's many, many funny things, and so that's what they're spraying. 6 million acres. Heavy metals, of course, we've got arsenic, lead, cadmium. Dakota might want to comment on what one can do about that.
I'm going to do that in a follow-up show, however.
Okay. The other thing is that, this stuff is being spread by the water and has been spread in the, the tremendous winds over a very large area. This is unprecedented, I would say. This is one of my favorite words these days. In fact, it's a very favorite word all around. We're just, everything that's happening seems to be unprecedented. So, and then we have there's one thing we know about the Arkema plant exploded with a radius of 23, anyway. First responders, breathed it in, got sick, and they are suing. And that's another aspect of this when it begins to, and get on to the next bit, which is Florida. Yes, they had some chemical contamination. I'll just quickly finish the chemical contamination so we can get to bacteria and viruses, which is even more interesting. Dozens of hazardous waste sites that have already been associated with higher than average incidences of cancer. These have been overwhelmed during the in Florida with Irma. So, and then Puerto Rico, jumping to Puerto Rico. Yes, once again, grave risk, quote, grave risk from the exposure to chemicals and pollutants, given Puerto Rico's 18 open and 6 closed Superfund toxic sites, which already, you see, this is another aspect that comes out through the data, is that, not only are you dealing with this tremendous storm problem, but it's hitting an infrastructure that is creaking. In Puerto Rico, it was not nearly falling apart anyway. The whole power just went out. They still don't have power. But when you're talking about sewage and the whole of the water system, it was creaking anyway. And, now it has been more or less destroyed. And, they have to start again. And we'll get onto that. But
Jan, I have a question.
Yeah.
I didn't get to complete your whole report. I'm muting your mic. I'm getting feedback. Hold on. Okay. I didn't get to complete your full report, but my question is there data being collected on not only how a specific chemical plant is leaking into our water, but the interrelationship of 2 foreign chemicals that normally wouldn't be mixed together, creating a whole other casualty?
Earlier is no evidence of it. I mean, this is kind of new stuff. And once you get into, we're going to move into the world of bacteria and viruses in a minute, the same thing, exactly the same thing, applies, is that you've got all these viruses and bacteria swimming around together, exchanging genes and doing what they do. And so, this is a kind of, to me, it looks like a kind of breeding place so when Puerto Rico, also toxins, but it's quite interesting is that when you move into bacteria and viruses, do you want to do that now, or shall we?
Yeah. No, that's big.
We're moving as fast as I can. The sorts of questions here is that, when these microbes are being released, and, mosquitoes are a terrible problem, and it's in every possible way, psychologically as well as, in terms of the various viruses and things that they transmit. And going back to, now we're on the sort of problem with the viruses, is this, back to this NALED. A pregnant woman exposed to that thing that the U.S. Air Force is spraying a report suggests a 60% higher chance of having a child with an autism spectrum disorder. So that's the kind of thing that, you know, is and so we've got Zika, we've got, then we get in this whole thing in terms of what people are actually having to wade through. And it is quite disgusting in the sense that, you know, there's E. coli in standing water in people's homes in Houston, not everybody, obviously, 135 times what is considered safe. So people are wandering around this. The medical team that tested the water is concerned about residents wading through toxic waters. And if people have bad headaches, anything that goes wrong with you, don't think it'll go away. Come in and get something done about it. So, and then there's another article right next to this one that starts out saying countless people have waded through these floodwaters. And so we're talking about E. coli colony forming units. And this is several hundred units of E. coli with the EPA standard of hundreds, and the EPA standard is 0. And we go on. The one that I don't know, I guess it got a fair bit of publicity, but if you don't know it, it's shocking, is there were 2, and I think now 3, because this data is a little out now. You know, we're about 2 weeks out of date, and it's moving fast. And as I said, inquiries never end. But you know, we had you had your first death from flesh-eating bacteria. Have you come across that?
Yeah, definitely.
Fasciitis, and you know, there was one lady that died. And one man who it just got into a little cup, and he noticed a swelling, and the day before it began to spread down his arm. Anyway, he did live, but he received what he called massive amounts of antibiotics over the course of his hospital stays, and doctors also operated on his hand 3 times to drain the fluid and remove the tissue. He survived. And that is being, you know, it's not that it wasn't there before, but it's being spread around. And so how do you defend against it? What do you do? And then the last article here for, you know, the Texas file, if you like, is that both Harvey and Irma present, quote, nearly perfect conditions for Zika spreading mosquitoes. And they don't just spread the same type of mosquito. It doesn't just spread Zika. It spreads dengue fever, something called chikungunya virus. I don't know what that is, and yellow fever. And that's all with this Aedes aegypti mosquito. And that's what is being given the ability to spread faster. And so it is a real issue about, do we spray? Or do we let these things propagate freely? So you've got the whole problem of the infrastructure to get rid of this breaking down. And it's too late, it's gone. And getting it fixed, and this is a whole area that, you know, the politics of this are massive. You know, Florida, Texas already face huge infrastructure challenges, even when they weren't deluged by rain, partly because of poverty, but the other thing is rapid population growth. I mean, because it's a free kind of freewheeling, good economy that is geared for growth, I mean, they're building like mad. And they didn't think of the water, and they didn't think of the sewage. And now, you know, places like Miami, at the best of times, it's pretty hard to get rid of stuff below sea level. And so, you know, here's a description, a fairly description of what happened in Florida. Here's somebody says, quote, Irma was a literal shitstorm, but it's no laughing matter. Sewage spills pose a major threat to public health and are likely to become more common due to two increasingly connected crises that America faces: an aging infrastructure and climate change. Now that little quote more or less says it all. And another bit here, the prospect of, quote, a poop-laden water pooling around the streets of Miami is scary enough. Yet it's just a symptom of a much bigger problem that plagues hurricane-prone Florida. Rising sea levels are upending its ability to deal with floodwater in the first place. Double whammy, coming from above you and also coming up from underneath.
What you're describing is how we are now dealing with becoming a third world country, you might say, the same problems that have plagued other countries that are, you know, thought of as third world. Well, that's here now. And so we probably have something to learn from those countries and how have they dealt with these problems. And we need to adopt some of that ourselves instead of thinking that we've got it all under control with our progressive high-tech infrastructure. With that gone, you have to learn different ways of dealing with these issues.
It would be nice to think that many of these third world, I mean, many of these countries that you're talking about are being overwhelmed themselves. You know, whoops. We've got fewer people. You know, this whole thing about socioeconomic inequality, and this is what, you know, is so important in Puerto Rico. You know, you've got as you were saying, Dakota, you've got tens of thousands of hurricane survivors. What they have to do then is they've got to spend weeks in damaged homes or outside, exposed to mosquitoes and the rest of it, all of it, because they've got nowhere to go, waiting to be evacuated or whatever. The fact that there's no law and order, presumably, people have a great kind of do talk about communities working together. But, you know, in the Caribbean, there were instances of law and order breaking down. And the thing about Puerto Rico is you know so little. And this, you know, this brings us finally to the kind of mental effects of all this and what it's doing to people. And I think this is a very big and, you know, probably not thought about very much. You know, not only have you got all these mosquitoes, you've got your, you know, various infections and, you know, a dramatic worsening of all kinds of day-to-day problems that in normal times people would be able to cope with. But they get out of control in a crisis. And what therapists and social workers say, and it seems to be quite obvious, is that the most important way of getting over that is to get back into some kind of routine, you know, some kind of life. It might not be, but that's impossible without electricity, and it's impossible without water. And this is what the people of Puerto Rico are facing. And, you know, people are beginning to show up, quote, you know, with depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder, it says here. Now, I wonder, what is post-traumatic stress disorder when the stress is still there? It's not post at all. It's just stress. There's no post there. And so how do you deal with that? People's grief and panic and fright that, it'll never come back again the way it was. And it probably won't. And this to me is really key is, how do you deal with people's mental, I don't like the word mental illness, but how do you help people adjust? Mental health, this one of the people in Puerto Rico, so mental health is going to be huge.
Well, the first thing that's going to address mental health is getting people's basic survival needs met. I mean, once they feel they have food and clean water, that's when they can start to sort out the depression and the upset that they've clearly had. I wonder why we're just not getting the people off the island just as initial health care. Why we're not helping them just get off the island, get settled so that they can go back to their environment and do what they can.
Well, I mean, why not? I think the reason why not. It would cost far too much. And especially when you're talking about an island, and then especially when you're talking about what the powers that be in the United States now consider to be Hispanics. Because, I mean, I'm sure that, one Hispanic is just like another Hispanic to them, whether he's a citizen of the United States or not. I mean, it's absolutely disgraceful. I mean, now I'm speaking myself, is that, the way, there's some very, very dedicated people who have gone to Puerto Rico. I've stories of, ex-Marines who, just go there and do what they can. People who, there's a very interesting way that aid is being given, is that people hand over, they just put it out and buy the stuff and get it delivered on Amazon and just have it delivered. And so, there's a lot going on, but it does not seem to be anything that, is measurable in terms of the magnitude of the crisis that's facing people. The thing that worries me most about this is that it's going to disappear. It's already disappearing, but people are still there. You're in Houston, you're worrying. And these kinds of things, and I think Dakota, again, would have the answer to this, the kinds of poisoning that we're talking about from the toxins and they take years to show up. They don't, it's not happening now, it's going to keep happening. Mm-hmm. And then, you have to think about, well, next year it might happen again. Mm-hmm. And if you take 2 or 3 years, it will happen again. And this is where you wanted to come in is, how long will these areas remain habitable? Dominica is almost uninhabitable at the moment, Dominica. I have a category in the database called destitution and living conditions. And when you mix that with hurricanes, all this stuff comes out. But, I think it is a real question. I don't know what the answer is. It's a very important question. How many times?
I think what we're coming back to, just look what's happening in our nation right now, is it seems that organization is at its lowest esteem. And we have an administration that is clearly not seeing this as a priority, if anything, actually dismissing it. And so it has been thrust upon the local communities and those of us that express some empathy on how we can broach these kinds of issues. And I think that's what we're down to now. Just like those communities in Puerto Rico, they're depending upon each other in very small groups to survive this. So then I think about, okay, what can our local groups here that are, you know, not being bombarded with these stressful situations, what can we do? It might mean simply buying one flight ticket after another, you know, being able to hire a plane and already have plans for the refugees. It comes back to this issue is a global issue. And we have some serious things to address in our own personal government right now.
Dakota and I, years and years ago, we were working together when Fukushima exploded. And, you know, at the radiation and the monitoring of radiation. And we were talking then about equipping people with the tools to be able to monitor these things. Mm-hmm. And if there was anything that I think that, you know, I think the idea is still a good one, and now it's really come home. You know, I would want to see, you know, the private sector or people, private sector, if the government is pulling out, well, good riddance. But then, you know, people need to begin to equip themselves with, you know, the tools needed. And they do exist. And if groups of people got together and, you know, did that, then you might have a kind of community building that could come out of the crisis, you know, maybe Phoenix-like, very unlike me to be talking like this, but, you know, yes, why not? So how to get that together and moving forward, I don't know, but, you know, that's where I kind of hand over to you, but I think it's very important because otherwise it's just going to be swept under the carpet and people will start dying and it'll be forgotten why.
I think it's important also to remember that there is small groups and communities and efforts are happening. It's just that we're not on the national and international news. So it's like, I like to uphold that there is a movement happening here to address these issues. But unless you really go searching for them, you know, we feel like they're absent, and I don't. I think there's a growing movement that is addressing all of these aspects. We're just not visible.
Standing Rock is very much, you would say, part of that, or the beginning of it, or the, you know, this is a big thing for me, that was. But you need the technology, though. This is where I, you know, it's good to have the people, but, you know, this monitoring technology is, I presume, quite high tech. I don't know.
Are you talking about monitoring of radiation and water contamination and things like that?
Yes. But people can do it themselves.
And you know, some of that is in the Herbal Database on apps for your cell phones, for example, that will tell you what is in a food or in the water, that sort of thing, and radiation detection. Some of that is feasible, but of course the other issue with cell phones is that when the power goes out, so does the cell phone. However, there are ways to charge phones that don't rely on the electricity being on, and so it's that level of knowledge that's required for people to plan ahead for this sort of thing. And part of the problem is that folks are so confident that in the community providing the services, and I'm talking about the government community providing the services where they live, that they don't think of these things until all of that's gone. And, you know, it's like right here where we are, we feel very safe here. Like everything's just going to continue on as it has, and we don't need to equip ourselves with some of these do-it-yourself technologies But I think that as these kinds of events become more frequent, folks are going to start thinking twice about the safety of their own turf and have some kind of motivation to learn how to deal with these issues themselves instead of waiting. They're seeing that the people who are waiting for government help are being left out for the most part.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people waiting still, very much so.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course it gets, I mean, you would have to sort of include in that whole thing, I think, is that there is this evidence that it's still very much, there's an economic breakdown. The poor people, who are the people that don't have the knowledge of the technology and all that kind of thing, and they're the ones that get hit hardest. They're the ones that are sickest. I mean, to get back to the health aspect, is because they're poor, they're sick. So they get hit with this. My question always is yes, it's wonderful to have good ideas, and we know what would be effective, but you can take two views. Either say, will it happen, and the answer is no, it won't happen, or two is, how do I make it happen? And that's where I think we need to start. And that's enough for many more programs.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think also it's really important to stay uplifted about this. So my recommendation to anyone who's listening and regarding these issues is always look for 1, 2 others that are looking at any way that we can assist, even if it's just communicating the information that's shared here. It's really important to, come on, we've been through hard times before. We have no idea how long things are going to evolve in this direction or when it's going to take a turn. But what I'm learning around the people of our country right now, it has a lot to do with your spirit, your hopefulness, your faith. And it's each of us continuing to go, okay, let's continue. Let's stay strong together. Let's keep holding one another up, because these things are devastating. And we've got to stay in good spirit if we're going to be of any assistance to one another.
Yeah. Personally, part of how I do that is that when something arises that seems insurmountable, I have a deep-seated belief that there is somewhere a solution for it. And my motivation is to find out what that is. And I find answers as a result of that. And so that's key is, it's an opportunity to learn something beneficial. And so we always need to be looking for, okay, this is the situation, and I am going to find out how we can adapt to it in such a way that there's a beneficial outcome for as many as possible, not just for me, but for all life, including, the humans in my community, the animals in the community, the plants in the community, because we are all in it together. We need to take care of all of it.
And I will say one thing in the coverage that I've seen here, I don't think there was one article or even reference to, my God, what happened to the butterflies or the little mammals or the ants or the worms, or, it was devastating for them, if far more. And but that question doesn't get asked, and I think, it's what I call, and, or you do too, I'm sure, all our relations, and, they are just as important.
Yes, absolutely.
Not answering.
So
the media is not asking that.
Yeah. So Dakota, I think that we might be bringing this session to a close, and letting our audience know. I think the inquiry report that Jan put together is brilliant. It's got wonderful links in it. And I think we probably could even initiate a conversation in Herbal Knowledge Keepers group on, you know, as they review Jan's report, they could then start the inquiry in the group and look for those bridges to the kinds of things that the Herbal Database has to offer.
Okay, and in the next show, we're going to take these issues that were raised and we're going to use the Herbal Database to find solutions and answers as much as possible to these different types of things. So the next show is going to be on solutions. Thank you, Jan, for an excellent presentation of what's been going on. And I know it's ongoing. You're still collecting information. We won't know what the outcome of this is for quite some time. Just as with Fukushima, folks think that went away, but it has not by any means. The data keeps pouring in about the results of that. So let's just remember these things are ongoing and they need to be, I think, a source of motivation for us to empower ourselves with knowledge about what's happening and how to deal with it.
Just to another aspect that you might consider covering is I don't know what's bigger, but I saw one statistic was that the number of people who die from air pollution is more than any other single source, including war, car crashes, you name it, air pollution. And of course, the forest fires have made that a lot worse in this country, in your country, and Russia, and in so many other places as well. So there's a huge data set on air pollution and health as well.
Jan, it'd be good to have you back to cover the fires and the air pollution from the fires.
Also, Jan, if at any point you get a website and we have access to that, you will. Okay.
You'll have access to it all.
All right, so that later we can go back and add that link and absolutely get people more familiar with the information.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I really appreciate all that you've done. Thank you.
Well, great pleasure. I don't know who presses a button or what happens now.
Okay, we just say goodbye.
Yep.
Goodbye.
And I'll end the broadcast. Thank you.